Hello and welcome to this brief training on maximizing opportunities for student success. Today we're going to talk about the innovation implementation cycle. My name is Rebecca Peterson and I am an education specialist here at the Utah State Board of Education. So let's talk just a little bit about being in a team. Right now on your community council, you've got probably a group of different people who maybe come from varying backgrounds and have different points of view, but you are coming together as a team with a common objective to make a difference in the students' educational outcomes for those kids that are at your school. So here are a couple of thoughts to consider as you sit and work with your team. All of these quotations represent different components of teams that are effective, teams that make a difference in student outcomes. My favorite quotation, and really what all of this hinges on, is this last one. And this is from a researcher named Karen Blasey. She says, "Students cannot benefit from instructional practices and interventions that they do not receive." The reason that we're going to focus on implementation is that it is effective implementation that really will get us to the end, to that result where kids can benefit. Because if the implementation isn't there, then it doesn't matter what you've planned in the beginning. There are a couple of characteristics of effective teams. And when you think about effective teams, your community council may already have been working on things, you've done things for a while, or you may be at a new school where this is the initial attempt at creating these plans. Either way, one thing that always provides a lot of hope is this idea that even though the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, the second best time is today. And so this is your chance to look at what your practices are, how you're involved in your team, and to make some really conscientious decisions about how do you want to function and how do we want to work together to make sure that students get the benefit of the things we're working on. There are a couple of items to focus on when you're evaluating your team. First one is clarity of purpose. Second is accountability. This is talking specifically about accountability to each other, accountability to your team, and to making sure that people know what they're going to do, how they're going to do it, and how everybody else on that team will know when those things are done. Team structures. And then the last one, which really is probably the most important one, is trust. And being able to make sure that your team is a place where people can respectfully express disagreement and work toward a solution. And that those communication norms and values are upheld by the whole team. So if you take just a moment and think about the things that are up here on the screen and think about where are we as a team in knowing what these things are. Can we state what our purpose is? Do we know what our norms are? And just work your way through that list. Right now on the screen there is a recipe. And this recipe is something that you can use as you're coming up with the area that you want to focus on and you're generating your plan. And if you have all of these components in place, then that's when you see those positive outcomes for your students. So let's start with an effective intervention. So this is component number one. And I'd like to kind of think about this as a cookie recipe. And we're going to go with chocolate chip cookies because I like chocolate chip cookies. And if you think of each of these as one of the ingredients that's required to get to your end result, then these are those individual components. So effective interventions are things that have a track record or research behind them that shows that there's a likelihood that they would be successful treating the problem or being that intervention or the innovation that you want to put into your schools. When you're looking at effective interventions, those are things that already have a track record. They're not necessarily things that somebody's friend heard that worked well. These are things where you can find information, for example, on What Works Clearinghouse and other research-based information. The second item is effective implementation methods. And this has to do with if you have, let's say you found a great intervention for reading, maybe reading comprehension. And this intervention has a lot of background research, it's got a lot of good information with it, but it doesn't really matter if there's no way to implement it within the schools. I'm going to kind of make an analogy here a little bit with back to the cookies and thinking about these ingredients. Maybe this is a really simple cookie recipe. It only has flour, sugar, and chocolate chips. So we go through, we've found our recipe, we've got our flour, that's our effective interventions, we've got some sugar, that's our effective implementation methods, and enabling context is the support of the team, the support of the group that's working together to be able to put that innovation into practice. All of those things together then give you your successful result, which are the delicious cookies. However, you notice that this is a multiplicative model, which means that if any one of these things are 0, your end result is going to be 0. So that would be kind of like making the chocolate chip cookies, and if you skip the effective implementation methods and you think, I'm kind of running out of sugar, maybe I'll substitute something else, or I actually like, instead of sugar, I really like salt, and you put that in there instead, then the result that you're going to get is going to be completely different. It's not because the intervention was not effective, but it was because the implementation wasn't followed with fidelity, which means doing it the way it was intended to be implemented. So implementation that works is the goal of reducing the knowing and doing gap. So sometimes we know what we need to do, but for some reason it doesn't quite translate into the action. And there are some key components that when those components are evaluated, or when those parts of the recipe are in place, you're going to be much more likely to have success and see those things make a difference in the outcomes for students. This tool that is up here on the screen is one of my very favorite tools. It's called the Hexagon Tool, and it's something that you can use to guide you through discussions in your community council when you're looking at different interventions and looking at what the definitions of the problems are, how does this fit with what we need? Do we have the capacity to implement this? But it helps you to go through all those components so that you can make sure that you can actually implement this idea that you have. On the left-hand side of the screen is a hyperlink to trainings that are designed for your team, for your school community council to go through together. And those trainings are broken into these components of identify needs, plan, implement, monitor and assess, analyze and understand. And each of those trainings are fairly short modules that you can work through with questions and answers that will help your team to identify these components of the implementation cycle. And this matters because when you have implementation plans in place and you follow these steps, you have a much higher probability of actually getting these results to where you want them to be, which is at the student level. Some of the implementation research shows that not intentionally putting this into place results in, you get 17% of the implementation, but it takes you 14 years to get that 17%. Or if you've planned this implementation, you've planned all these components, and you've done it carefully and with fidelity, so you've made your good chocolate chip cookies, then you have about 90% implementation, and it takes about 3 years to get there. So you've got 14 and 17 or 90 and 3. So that's why this matters. So take just some time as your team and work through the tutorials that are on this site over here on the left. And just for fun, here's references. So if you need more information, this is the source information for the items that are on these slides. And thank you for joining.